Want some help getting your first job as a JavaScript developer? Let's take a look at how to build the ultimate portfolio project that will help you do just that. What's up, everyone? My name is James Q. Quick, and I do weekly videos about web development related topics. And I am super passionate about helping web developers and specifically JavaScript developers get their first job in tech or just take next steps in their careers. So one of the things you hear about all the time is building portfolio projects, and people look for advice of how do I get better? And people say, build stuff, and you don't know what to build. And then how do you actually turn that into a portfolio project on your resume that's impactful, that you can talk about in interviews? How do you know that it's something worthwhile to recruiters and interviewers, etc.? Well, I'm here to tell you, if you follow the tutorial or any given tutorial and post that as a portfolio project, that's not going to cut it. It's by far not going to cut it. What's really important is that you take things that you learn and maybe you follow a tutorial to a certain extent, but then you build something on top of that on your own. So you could use what you learned to build something completely different. You could use what you learned to build on top of that thing and really make it your own and add additional features, again, to show that you're capable of not just following a tutorial and following steps that people give you, but you're capable. You're able to learn things and build things on your own beyond that, that's the part that gets really, really important. So this video, we're going to walk through building a portfolio project, but the key here is that's not it. That's not the portfolio project that's going to get you the job. That's not the ultimate portfolio project. What this is an example of a project. And then what we'll do at the end is we'll talk about very specific examples of things that you can add to this project to show you can learn, you can build, talk about in your interviews, and come up with the ultimate portfolio project in the end. Again, it's not about what we necessarily build here today. It's about what you do beyond that you can then talk about and brag about in your interviews and actually have an impact on you getting that first job or your next job as a JavaScript developer. So let's take a second to see what we're going to build. We're going to build a YouTube resource gallery. And my thought is, as you're learning, you can save off videos from YouTube that are helpful resources for you that you can go back and revisit. So you can see I've got two listed here. They've got this little zoom in effect, and then we click on one and we get the video pop up so we can watch that right inside the app, and then it goes away. We can also add additional video IDs that'll go and find the image for this video, and then also let us watch that video as well. Lastly, this is responsive. So as we shrink down the size, this will move these cards around and the different elements to make sure that it looks good on all screens. So it should cover all of our bases. Now, right now, we're just storing all of these IDs inside of local storage. You can see this here. But long-term, we'll talk about some extra features and things, including adding a database that you can add to this app to make it a much more powerful portfolio project. So that's what we're going to build. So we are going to walk through building this demo. At the end of this, we're also going to talk about those additional features. But also the really cool part about this is we're going to set this up and host this with our sponsor today, which is Hostinger. So Hostinger is a hosting platform where you can host a ton of different sites. We'll talk more about them at the end. They're especially useful for hosting WordPress sites as well. So you can sign up for a plan and you can host up to 100 websites. We'll talk about those details as we go through this, which is really cool because you can do freelance projects. You can create multiple sites for yourself. This is the exact kind of thing that I did for myself when I started learning. So we'll talk about this more at the end when we go through the actual deployment process to get your website live. But let's take a minute to show you what it looks like to sign up for your account with Hostinger so that you have it by the time we get to that point at the end. So you'll have an exclusive link in the description below to get to Hostinger. And when you do, you can scroll down to see the details about the all-in-one web hosting, which has some really amazing features. You can host 100 websites. You can have 100 gigabytes of storage. You can also have a bunch of park domains, and you can have managed WordPress, which is the easiest way to set up WordPress. I actually did something very similar to this when I was getting started to have multiple sites on one platform. After you go through to paying, you can decide how long you want to pay out for. And then we also have an exclusive coupon code that you can use with the coupon code James to take an additional 7% off. And now you can host a bunch of different websites on here for a reasonable rate. And that's what we're going to use to host at the end of this video. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with the code. Now, a couple of resources for you to have as we go through this. One is the GitHub repository. You have a link to both of these things in the description below. So the JavaScript local storage YouTube gallery, you have a link to that so you can grab the source code and kind of shortcut ahead if you want to. Also, the other cool thing that I want to use is happyhues.co. So it's basically color schemes that you can use. And it also shows you the colors in context. So you can actually see them on different backgrounds and stuff, which is often the missing piece of what to do. I found this tip from Alex Trost on TikTok. So you should definitely follow him because he's got great tips. But anyway, so I'm going to use that and then the GitHub repository. Again, links in the description below. And then again, this is what we're going to build. So let's go ahead and get started. So I am inside of VS Code. I still haven't gotten this to to work for everyone out there, and I still don't know why. At some point, I'll have to actually figure this out. But I have an extension, create web boilerplate, which just creates 3 files for me. The index.html, which has a link to the CSS file, and then the JavaScript file. So you can pause, you can type this all out. You can go and copy the code from the source code if you want to. There's nothing in the CSS or the JavaScript file, so we're actually going to start inside the HTML. So there's not going to be a ton of markup in here. A lot of the stuff that we're going to do is going to come from JavaScript, which should be fun. But we'll have our main container for the body, and then we'll also have a pop-up, which is where the video player is going to be. So I'm going to use Emmet snippets. Highly recommend using Emmet, where I can do .container. That's going to do expand to a div with a class of container. I can also have a .header in here. And then inside of this, we'll have an empty div. And then we'll have an H1. So this is just going to be our title. We're actually going to give this a class of headline. And that kind of matches up with the naming convention inside of the Hues color app that we just saw. So this is going to be called the My YouTube Resource Gallery. Now you'll probably want to copy that into the title as well, so it shows up in the title bar. And then I've got a little piece of text. I won't type this all out. I can just copy this over, but a paragraph tag for a little bit of detail. So the perfect app to keep track of valuable resources while learning to code. As you come across a helpful video, add the ID here, and then you'll be able to like watch the videos later on. So I think it's a cool idea. All right, so the 2 things, again, if we look at the final example, we have like the header here, and then we have the form next to it. So we're gonna go ahead and create that form too. So we're also gonna use Flexbox for this header to set this div side by side with this form. So we'll talk about how to do that. We won't have an action for this form, and we won't have a whole lot of information in here, but we'll have a label for the video ID, and we'll say video ID. And then we'll also have an input of type of text. Now, again, using these Emmet snippets to kind of abbreviate and type things quicker. So the name of this will be video ID. The ID will be video ID as well. And then we'll just have a placeholder of I'm making up numbers and characters. I don't know if this is an actual ID for a YouTube video. I wonder, anybody curious if we go and try this? I kind of am. So let's actually try this really quickly. So let's go to youtube.com/ is that how, I don't know how videos work. Let's go to YouTube and just click on a video and see. It may be like /V or something. Okay, so it's this one. So let me just paste in that. We'll see if that's a YouTube video. Just out of curiosity, it's not. Again, I just made that up from scratch, so no surprise there. Okay, so there's a placeholder just to kind of show what that's going to look like. And then we will have a button. Now we're going to go ahead and set an on click in here. And this is going to call a save video function, and it's going to pass in the event. So we're going to pass that in, and then we'll say save the video as the text for the button. Cool. So below that form, we're going to have a UL with an ID. Again, Emmet snippets here. Highly recommend learning these. But the UL is going to be the video's container. And then basically we're just going to kind of leave that there and then populate this with JavaScript. So we can kind of leave that for now. And then the last thing we want to do, it doesn't really matter where we put this because it's going to be positioned on top of everything with a position of fixed. But we want to have our pop-up. So we're going to have an ID or a div with an ID. Actually, let's come back to that in a second. That way we don't have to worry about like toggling that on and off for now. So we'll come back to the pop-up. So we can move over to our JavaScript file, and we're going to have a few different things in here. The main thing we want to have is a variable to hold our YouTube video IDs, and this is going to start out as an array. Now, what we want to do is load that array from local storage and be able to save these IDs inside of local storage and reference them as well. Now we're also going to need a reference to a couple of different DOM elements, and I've got a little snippet in here for get ID. This is a really handy one. It's going to autocomplete to show me a full snippet to get an element by ID, and this is going to be the videos container. Now that should match up with the videos container that we just created. So we're going to generate an LI for each one of the videos, basically a card. And then we're going to add those inside of the videos container. So that's what we're doing. Cool. So we can kind of start with this. So I'm going to simulate a load videos function. And in theory, what this is going to do is this is going to get the videos out of local storage. But for now, what we're really just going to do is just manually set this to an array. And then I'm just going to copy in an existing video ID that I have on my clipboard. So that will eventually grab these from local storage. We'll come back to this in a second. And then what we want to do is we'll create our display videos function. So we'll do that. And then what we'll do is we'll call load videos function first, and then we'll call display videos. So the load videos, we'll grab them out of local storage, set them to this array. Then the display videos, what we're going to do is iterate through each one of those videos and convert each video into an HTML string. So we could do something like this. We could have a regular for loop where we're going to iterate through let I equals 0 I less than YouTube videos ID dot length I plus plus and then just log in here the ID. So we should be able to just see that this is working. Now I'm going to use the live server extension. So you can search this in the extensions and it's live server. It's great. I highly recommend it. I use it all the time. What that gives me is a command inside of here. So Command Shift P on Mac or Control Shift P on Windows to open with live server. And so when I do this, this is going to run this application at port 5500. It's going to open that page for me and we can see what we got. Obviously we got to do some styling here. But what we also should see is inside of the console, if we did this right, we actually didn't do this right. So I was trying to log ID, but we didn't get a reference to this. So this would be the YouTube video IDs array at index of I. So that should now just log out that one random ID. And so you could go through and do this basic for loop, but we're going to do this a little bit in a little bit neater of a way using an array function called map. So array function map is used to convert each individual input of an array to some other type of value. So it's going to convert that thing. It still have the same number of original items as output items, but it'll be converted in some way. So we're going to take our YouTube video IDs and we're going to call map. And we're going to say for each ID, what do we want to return? And in this case, we're going to return an ES6 template literal string with these backticks. Now we're doing this so that we can just write HTML inside of the string and then use that to populate on the screen. So we're just generating an HTML string and then we'll use these here in a second. So we're going to have an LI. This is going to have an on click of, it's going to call click video, and then we'll pass in the event, and then we'll also pass in the ID. So inside of the ES6 template literal strings, to get a variable value, we have to use our $ curly bracket syntax. Now make sure you pay close attention to the syntax because this is kind of tricky here of doing the interpolation inside of the template literal string. This is probably a little different or weird for you, so just kind of stick with me. But we'll have our LI, and then inside of our LI, we're going to have an image tag with a class of thumbnail. That's how we're going to style it. So we'll have our thumbnail. And then I am going to copy this part so I don't manually type this. And you can copy this from the source code if you want to. So I'm going to copy in the URL for the image. Now, YouTube actually has, let's actually search this, YouTube thumbnail URL. So if you search for that and then find a Stack Overflow post, there's a list here of all the different URLs or images that YouTube puts together for videos. So if we were to take this URL and copy it, and then take this ID and then put those together. So inside of the URL, we will add in the ID. You'll see the image. If we do that right, we should see the image for that. Let's try that again. So actually, I think I'm missing the G for JPEG. No, I'm missing something else. So there's that. And then I think I just pasted in the wrong thing. So now we'll paste in the ID. Let's see if that works. Cool. So there's the image for this quicksort video that is on YouTube. Now I want to give a shout out. This is kind of an up and coming channel, I would say. And I'm going to just replace in that video ID that we just looked at. So, because I want to give a shout out to this creator and kind of keep encouraging his work. So this is Joseph Rainovic on YouTube, and he's doing really cool stuff with like data structures and algorithms in JavaScript. He just got started, and he does a great job explaining this stuff. So I want to give a shout out if you want to learn more about sorting and algorithms, data structures. He's got a great channel. But that's how we're going to generate this cover image. So we're going to take, this is just the base URL, then we're just going to throw in the ID to get the appropriate one. Now, we don't know specific information about this video. So the alt is just going to be cover image for YouTube video with ID of ID. Again, we're not able to do anything specific because we're not using the YouTube API or anything. We're just kind of using the ID that we have to be able to display the image and then show the video. Now, the other thing we're going to have is we're going to have a button with a class of delete button. And this is going to be so that you can remove this from local storage when you store it. And this is going to use the HTML representation of the X value. So it's going to look like that. And then we'll close out the button. All right, so that should look good. So if we look at, we can look at the HTML strings, and let's just log this out because I want to show you what this looks like. So HTML strings, and let's see if this actually comes back to us. So back on one of these tabs, this tab, we should see that this is showing us a bunch of, or just one actual HTML. But this is an array of HTML strings. And what we want to do is combine this into just one big HTML string. So I'm actually going to, maybe we'll choose another, let's choose linked list and let's copy in another ID from one of his videos. So let's copy that in up here. All right, so there's two. And now what you should see is that it's more obvious that this is an array of items. What we want to do is combine those into one. So we can actually take the output of this, which is an array. We can call .join on this and pass in an empty string to just put it all together. And that is going to be the videos HTML string. So videos HTML string. And now we can take this and we can say videos container.inner HTML and set it to the videos HTML string. Now it's not going to look great yet because it's not styled, but we should start to see that, well, we got at least one of the images correct. I don't know about the second one. I don't know if maybe we didn't paste in the ID correctly. So let's actually double check that. Oh, it looks like it missed that first character. Interesting. So let's go and make sure that we got that one. And then we should have now images for both. So the quick sort and the linked list. So this is cool. We're able to show the images. We haven't gotten into playing the video and stuff like that yet, but we're able to represent the IDs and then, or like hard code the IDs and show the images. So let's start to work with actually loading the IDs from local storage. So local storage is accessible from, actually, let's just go in the browser and do this. So we can do a local storage.set item, and you give it a key, so random, and then a value of, hey, I'm a random string. Okay, so that's cool. The way you can access this is inside of the application tab, inside of local storage, and then the domain that we're on. And you can see I've got the old YouTube video IDs for testing. I'll delete that. And then I've got random value there. But the thing to know is that in local storage, you can only store strings. So if you want to store something more complicated like an array, you'll have to convert that to a string and then parse that using JSON.parse from the string into the value that you're looking for. So what that means is I'm going to run this once. So I'm going to run local storage.set item, and then we're going to set the YouTube video IDs. I'm going to set this to JSON.stringify of, and then I'm going to pass in this array. So I'm going to run this once to get some values in there. So if I run this, now come back to local storage, you should see that there's an array with values associated with that key. All right, so let me get rid of this line now. So now what I want to do is I want to take the YouTube video IDs array value variable, and I want to set this to local storage.get item, and then we're going to get YouTube video IDs. But again, the problem is this is going to give us a string. So what we need to do is do a JSON.parse of this. All right, and just in case this doesn't have anything yet, I'm going to do an or, so the double bar, and then set this to an empty array by default. That way, when you run this the first time on a new website, it will go ahead and load up an empty array, and then we'll end up saving that to local storage once it gets updated. So now let's log out YouTube video IDs. Let's log this out and just make sure that this is reading from local storage appropriately. And it looks like it is, which is great. And then it's also representing the cover images just like we expected. So that's great. Also notice that this is giving us a click video not defined. We'll come back to that. So let's go ahead and actually handle the form part of this. So let's create our function for const save video. And this is going to take in an event, and then we're going to do some stuff with it. So the first thing we want to do is do e.prevent default. By default, when you click a button inside of a form, it tries to submit that thing to a server. We don't want that to happen. The next thing we want to do is actually get the value of the input, the video ID input. Now remember, there's an input with an ID of video ID. So I'm going to do my snippet again for get ID, and we'll call video ID. And I'm actually going to rename this to video ID input, just to be clear that this is an input element. And then we're going to grab that video ID from the video ID input.value. So we grab I don't know why I did that. We grab the value out of that input element. So whatever is typed into here, we grab that text, and then now we can work with it. So just to show that this works, let's do video ID. Let's just log that out. So hopefully when we type in here, we'll see some text. We'll save the video. We see that this gets logged out, which now that means we can add it to our array of YouTube videos, or video ID. So there's two things we need to do. We need to update the array of videos that we have in memory. We also need to update what's in local storage and save that. So let's start with the first piece, which is to update the array. And I want to add this not to the end of the array, but the beginning. And to do that, we can do YouTube video IDs.unshift. This will add this to the beginning of the array. We'll pass in the video ID there. That works great. Another thing we can do is take the video ID input and set the value to an empty string to basically reset the form. And now we're going to update what's stored in local storage. So we can say local storage.set item. We did that initially, but now we want to do this again. And we want to set this for the YouTube video IDs item. And we want to set this to the YouTube video IDs. But remember, we need to convert what is an array to a string. And we can do that with JSON.stringify. So we say we want to stringify, we want to convert this JSON object to a string. Okay, so this means we can go out to YouTube. We can grab another video. Let's see if I'm a big fan of Anya Kubo. So I'm going to grab a video ID from her. So you should check out her channel on YouTube. She's amazing. And let's come back to our project and let's add in the ID for that one. And so we save the video and nothing happens. But then when we refresh, we now see that video pop up. You may be wondering what's happening. Well, we updated the array, but we didn't then call display videos to show the new videos. So since we have this function already created, we can just call display videos. All right, now we need another video to show that this is working. So let's go and scroll down and let's find this video from Anya Kubo. Again, big fan, go and check out her channel of build and sell APIs. I think this is her video with 1 million views, which is wild. So let's grab that ID. Let's come back and let's now add this one. And now we should see this pop up. So it re-renders all of these thumbnails. And now we get to see them pop up. And we're still logging this stuff on the side. So we can get rid of that. And we can get rid of this one. Cool. So this is really starting to come together. Now we can start to style some of this stuff so we can move into our CSS. All right, so I'm going to start with creating a series of variables inside of CSS. And the way we do that is with the root element And then I'm going to copy these in because I don't think we need to manually write these. And you can copy these from the source code if you want. But we've got variables for background color, headline color, copy, which is just your paragraph text, accent color, and accent text. So this is basically going to be the button color. This will be the button text color. And again, these colors came from this happy hues, and you can scroll down to choose whichever one you want, and you can swap out the values. So you can see that I just copied them from here. So I did body as paragraph, I did button text as accent text, I did button as accent, etc. So you can go and choose any of these you want and have a totally different color scheme, and it still look pretty good. So feel free to do whatever you want with colors there. So let's go ahead and do a couple of basic things. Let's do our font family for a sans serif that always looks better and more modern at least. And then we'll set the background color. And the way we use our variables is with var parentheses dash dash, and then get IntelliSense inside of VS Code for that. So let's just see if that's working. Let's go over, and you see that we do have our colors are looking good. So that's awesome. A lot of styling to be added, but it's looking good. One of the things we'll want to have is I'm going to set the box sizing to border box. This is going to make sure that if we set width and height, it's going to go ahead and include the padding inside of that as well. Then we can have a little bit of text for, or a little bit of styling for our container. So that's the overall container for the application. And we're going to set a max width of 1000 pixels. And then a little trick here to center stuff is to do a margin of 0 auto. And then we'll set some padding in here of 30 pixels. So you can come back and see that's starting out a little bit. We centered the stuff in the screen at least, but there's obviously a lot more to do. Now, one of the things I want to do also is go ahead and style our paragraph and label. And we'll use a color, and this is going to be a variable of the copy color there. All right, so we'll do that. We'll say the font size is going to be a little bit bigger than default, so 18 pixels. We'll also set the spacing to be a little wider, so 1.5 pixels, and the line height to be 34 pixels. This will just give it all a little bit more breathing room. Spread it out, and you can see the colors are applied. We still have to style this one in our form, so we're getting there. All right, so let's actually move into the header. So the header here, I think I mentioned we would use Flexbox before. We could do this with Flexbox or Grid. In this case, we're going to use Grid. So we're trying to position two separate things, each one taking up 50% of the screen side by side. So we can say a display of grid, and then we can define our grid template columns. And we'll do one FR and one FR. This means both of them are going to have the same amount of available space. All right, and then we'll say align items is going to be center. We can use the cool gap property of 40 pixels to put space vertically and horizontally between each card. And then we'll set the margin top to be 60 pixels. All right, let's see what that looks like. Okay, so these are starting to be side by side, which is good, but it looks like they're not quite 50-50. And I think that's because we missed something up here. So we actually want the header to only wrap the form and the headline stuff, not the actual container. Now we should see that these are more 50-50, which is what we were expecting. So that's good. All right, so now we can continue to style this. So we can style more into our header. We can do our an H1 with a class of headline. We'll set the color to be var and then headline. We'll set the font size to be a little bigger, so 54 pixels. And then we'll give a little bit of margin bottom of 2 pixels. And then one of the things I want to do is when the screen shrinks down, I want all this stuff to kind of sit on top of each other. So instead of being side by side, I want these to stack on top of each other. So we can use a media query for this with @media, only screen, and we'll say the max width at 800 pixels. So this is going to apply for anything 800 pixels or less wide. We'll set the header to be a display of block instead of grid. So now as we shrink this down, you should now see that this will jump, although it didn't. So we need to actually check that. So we did a max width of 800 pixels. and we targeted our header class. Let's make sure that this has a class of header, which it does. And just coming back to the code, obviously I got a typo. So max width, if you spell that correctly, hopefully now, if we now resize this, we'll see that all go on top of each other. So we're just changing from using grid to now using a display block. We could also change the grid template columns to just be one FR, to only have it be one column. So it has 2 columns, and then we switch down and it goes to 1. It'll do almost the exact same thing here. So either way would be fine. So now we can start to style our form, and we can start with our label, and we're gonna make this be a display of block to make it take up its entire row. And we'll set the margin bottom to be 5 pixels. And then for our input, we're gonna add some padding. We'll add a full width, we'll add border radius, etc. So we'll have our padding is gonna be 20 pixels top and bottom, 15 pixels left and right. We'll do width, we'll make it full width, so take up as much space as it can. We'll say there's not gonna be a border. We'll say there's a border radius of a few pixels, so 3 pixels maybe, and then font size of 18 pixels. Now, talking about how to build the perfect or ultimate portfolio project, one of the things that you should do always is start to style your things differently. So as you follow this tutorial, take whatever leeway you want to style this with different colors, different font sizes, etc. Really make it your own. All right, so there is our input, and then we also want to do our button. So we can do a form with a child of button, so basically a form button. We can set the margin top to be 10 pixels, do overall padding of 20 pixels. There's a lot of similar stuff here. Border radius of 3 pixels. We'll set the font weight to be bold. Now we'll use those colors. So the background color will be var, and then this will be the accent. And then we'll set the color for the text to be var and accent of text. All right, so those are the colors coming from that cool app. Again, we'll set border to none, font size to 18 pixels. We'll set the cursor to a pointer. So when you hover over it, it'll show the pointer to let you know that you can click. And then we'll also make this 100% in width. Let's see what that looks like. That should look pretty close. So there's our header. They're side by side. And now if we shrink down, it all sits on top of each other. And you can see that I can click this button, which works pretty well. So I think the basics of that styling is pretty cool. So the next thing we want to do is start to actually style our container. And for this, we are additionally or also going to use the CSS Grid, and we're going to define some dynamic and flexible columns. So the way we're going to do that, we're going to target the videos container, and we'll use display of grid, and then we'll say grid template columns. And now inside of here, we want to tell it to basically put as many of these on each row as we can by setting a minimum width. So as long as we can fit another image on there with a minimum width of 250 pixels, go ahead and put it on there, and then basically distribute the rest of the space that we can. So we want to make sure each card has 250 pixels. If it doesn't have that available, it's going to wrap down, and then it can go from 250 pixels to the availability of the screen. So we're going to call the repeat function. We're going to use a property called auto fit. This is going to take care of that kind of auto scaling. And then we're going to tell it to determine whether or not to fit this thing on the page by setting a minimum and a maximum, or on the row. So we're going to say it has to have at least 250 pixels, and it can have up to 1 FR, which is like whatever available space there is. Then we'll also set the gap property to 10 pixels. So this ought to start to be looking better, although we need to actually style the thumbnail in itself. So you can see this starting to try to set these up, but we've got to style the thumbnail inside of each LI item. So a couple of things. You may notice that since these are LI elements, we have the little like LI dot, and we can get rid of that. So this videos container is a UL element. So we can do list style type of none to get rid of those, and then do padding of left, the inline padding. So padding inline or padding left to be 0 to get rid of that. And then we'll set the margin top to be 60 pixels just to kind of bring that down a little bit. So now we've brought it down a little bit. You see no more padding on the left, and you see no more dots, which is good. Now, let's start to style the actual thumbnail. So we'll say that we're going to target the thumbnail class, and this will have a border radius of 10 pixels. We'll do width of 100%. We'll do cursor pointer because we want to be able to click on these, and then we'll eventually do a transition with transform form of 250 milliseconds. Let's get that extra one in there. Cool. All right, so those are starting to look better. Actually pretty good. So this is kind of what the end goal looks like. Now we want to do a little bit of a zoom effect here where we want the picture to zoom in, but the whole thing to stay kind of the same size. It's kind of weird to explain. So what we can do is we can come down to our thumbnail class and we can do a hover. So when we hover on thumbnail, so hover here, we can do a transform of scale and we can scale this to 1.2. Now we added the transition, so this ought to have a little bit of an effect here, but we don't want the whole card to like get bigger. We just want to have it kind of zoom in on the card at the same size. So to do this, we can target, I think this is a cool effect. We can target the videos container. So we can target the LIs, the LI children. And we can say that overflow is hidden. So this is going to let the image itself expand, but then hide the part that goes beyond the actual frame, which gives this like zoom in effect. And I personally think this is a pretty cool effect. You noticed a little bit that you lose a little bit of the rounded edges up there when you hover. So I just applied the border radius to the LI as well. So same thing, 3 pixels. And then also we're going to make this position relative because we're going to use that delete button is going to be absolutely positioned to the card. And it's still expanding a little bit past where it should. And that's because of having this button down here. So we want to absolutely position that. And we'll do that next. So let's go ahead and do our delete button. And our delete button will be position absolute. So position absolute. And that means it's going to specifically be kind of relative to its parent. And it kind of disappeared on us here. So let's go back and check that. So on the delete button, we'll have a top property. So we'll have top 2 pixels. Then we'll have right of 2 pixels. And then we'll go ahead and style this thing as well. So you can see it's going to show up here. We want to make this look a little bit better. So we can get rid of the border. So border none. We can say border radius is 100%. This will just kind of give it like a little circle effect. We'll make it a little bit bigger. So font size 20 pixels. And then we'll also do cursor of pointer to show that we can click on that. So now we should see that we have our delete button up here. And then we also have our images growing. And I think that that's still expanding a little bit beyond what we want. So we need to take a look at that. And actually, I think what it is we have 2 separate border radiuses, radii. So we have 10 pixels down here somewhere. So 10 pixels and then 3. So let's set these to equal things. And I think now we'll get our effect. Okay, cool. So that's going to stay basically the same size. And then it still has like a little bit of blip there. I wonder if I've just missed that. Anyway, I think it looks pretty good. So it's pretty close, or at least close enough. So that works well. Now we can work on the X button to actually get rid of these. So we already have it defined to call the delete function, but we don't actually have the delete function created. So we have it set up to, we don't have it calling a delete function. We have it calling a click video. And we're going to use the click video function for 2 different things based on propagation. So since we're tracking clicks on the card itself, clicking the delete button also then triggers a click on the card itself. So we can actually track the click on the card and determine whether or not it was the delete button. And if so, be able to do something differently. So we'll create our click video function. This is going to take in the event and the ID. And we can start by just logging the event and ID. So if we go back and go into our console, click this and click this, one of the things we'll notice is inside of the one that we clicked the delete button, you can see that the target element has a class of delete button. But if we look at the other one that didn't click the delete button, the target is the thumbnail, which doesn't have a class of delete button. So there's lots of different ways you could detect this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to say if event.target.class list.contains the delete button. Now we know we need to delete that record. Otherwise, we will show the pop-up. So we'll do that as a to-do here in a second. So the pop-up is going to be to actually watch the video. So when we delete an ID, how do we do that? Well, we want to take the existing array of IDs and we want to remove the individual ID that we have in there. So we can do that by filtering out the ID. So we're going to take our array and we're going to reassign it to itself, but we're going to filter out the one we don't want. So we'll take our array. We'll now use another array function called filter. And so for each ID, we only want to include it if that ID, or we'll call this I, that I does not equal the incoming ID that we're checking for. So we only want to keep the ones that don't match that ID because we want to delete the one with the ID. All right, and then because of that, or after that, we want to update our local storage again. So we've done this before, set item for YouTube video IDs. And we're gonna set that to a stringified version, stringify of our YouTube video IDs array. So we're just updating the local storage, and also we want to now display the videos. Okay. All right, so hopefully that's good. So if we want to delete this when we click it, it goes away. It also re-renders. We can copy that ID again, come back in here and add the ID. We can refresh the page. We can delete this and refresh the page and everything. So that actually it looked like it removed I wonder, we may have missed something there. So build and sell APIs. If we delete this, it shows up on the page as deleted, which is interesting. But if we refresh, it's not. So let's double check that. So we're taking our YouTube video ID, we're calling filter on this, and we're getting rid of the one that has that ID. And then we're reassigning this to the right variable. Let's log this out. So let's log YouTube video IDs just to make sure we have the right thing there. So as we delete this one, we only have 3 items in there. And let's look inside of our application, local storage. It looks like we've got a typo because see that one of these is IS and one of these is not. So it must be this thing here. Nice. So now if I were to delete this and refresh, it should still be gone. And I can add it back by adding in the ID and then refresh and it should still be there. So one of the ways around this, by the way, that I use is anytime you have a string value that you're going to reuse, create a variable for it. So ID's key is going to be YouTube video IDs. And now use this key anytime you want to reference that key, or use that variable anytime you want to use that key. So this way it'll help with any typos because as developers, we make typos all the time. So let's just give our page a refresh. This should still look and act the same, but now we've got a little bit more safety and hopefully we don't run into as many errors. We can also get rid of this value that we're not using. All right, so that's starting to look pretty good. Now, the last thing we want to do is actually add the pop-up. So we can start with our markup. Told you we'd come to this in a little bit. So let's go ahead and do our pop-up in here. It doesn't really matter where it is, but I'm going to put this at the end. So I'm going to create a div with an ID of pop-up. We'll set an on-click of handle pop-up click. We'll call that function. Then we'll add a class of closed by default. And then inside of here, we're going to have an iframe. So this is, if you look at like a YouTube video embed, it uses an iframe and then you pass it a source. So we're going to create the iframe. We're going to give it a default width of 560, a default height of 315, and then a few other properties. So We're going to have the frame border set to 0. And then we're going to have the allow. So a couple of different things that we can allow in here. Just going to paste this in: accelerometer, autoplay, encrypted media, gyroscope. This is just what comes with it. And then we're going to have allow full screen. So we're going to allow that thing to be full screen. Now, the thing you'll notice that we don't have is we don't have a source property. So the source property tells YouTube which video to actually play, and we need to control that by handling when we click on a video, we show the pop-up. When we then click on the pop-up, it gets rid of the video to go back to the regular screen. So anyway, that's going to be our markup. And now inside of our JavaScript, we're going to need to reference a few additional things. So I'm going to use my get ID snippet again. We'll have the pop-up. And then I'm also going to query, this will be a little bit different one, so I'll have to tailor this, but this will be the video element itself. Maybe we should call this video L. And this is not going to be from get element by ID, but document dot query selector, and we're going to query a pop-up with a child of an iframe. So we want to select that iframe inside of the pop-up. So we want to get that video element. Now we're going to actually use that to show it. So when we call the click video, we now want to show this pop-up, and we want to do this by updating the source property. So the video.source is going to be, this is going to be another string that I'll copy in. So it's going to be a YouTube URL that uses the ID in part of it. So youtube.com/embed/ the ID that got passed in here. All right. And then now we want to toggle the class so that this thing is open instead of closed. So we'll take our pop-up. Is it just called pop-up? Yeah, our pop-up. And we'll say class list. We'll add the open class. And then we will remove the closed class. Remove the closed class. And I think we called this video L up here. So we'll need to update that. So what we should see now, we don't have the styling in place, but if we click on one of these, this will now load this video down here, load this video, this one, which actually is pretty cool. It's starting to work pretty close. So now we need to actually do the styling to put this thing on top of everything else. So we're going to add the styling in here for the pop-up and then the open and close styling. So our pop-up will have a position fixed because we want it to sit on top of everything else. We want it to go all the way across the entire screen. So we'll have top, bottom, left, and right as 0. This means it's going to take up all the space. I want to also center the content inside of it. So we'll do that with Flexbox. And the way we do that is display flex, justify content, center, align items, center. Justify content centers things on the main axis by default as horizontal or across. Align items center here is centering things on the cross axis, which is the vertical axis by default. You can switch those two. And then we'll set background color. We'll do this in RGBA, and I'm just making up a color 2020 2020 and then 0.95. That'll give, we should actually see it here. That'll give it a basically a dark gray color with a little bit of transparency. And if we refresh, I thought this actually, we haven't done the styling for the close, so we'll come back to that. Cool. So we'll also have a little bit of padding for when this thing gets smaller. So if we shrink down the page, we can do 40 pixels, 30 pixels, whatever. And that should... we haven't done our handle pop-up click. We haven't defined that, which makes sense. So now let's do our pop-up.closed. And I'm going to do like a slide this out of frame type thing. So this will be a transform, translate Y. And we want to translate this -100 VH. So it's going to translate it all the way off the screen. And then we'll set the opacity for this to 0. So I'm going to copy this, and then we'll do almost the same thing for open. So when it's open, we want to translate it not at all. So it'll actually be on the screen. And then we want to set the transparency or the opacity to 1. So it should be getting closer. So show it. Cool, that actually works. The problem here though is that this is not very responsive, as you can see. So we can actually make the iframe responsive itself. So let's come in and target this. And we can do this by setting the width to 100% and then the height to auto. We'll set the max width to 800 pixels so it doesn't go too big. And then we can use this property called aspect ratio of 16 and 9 to keep that thing with the correct aspect ratio. And then I ended up setting the background color of this because it ends up loading and is transparent for a little bit to the same color we just used. So we can actually use the same thing that we just did. So if we refresh, we don't have a way to close this yet. We should be able to see this pop up and it shows our video. And then we can see this come in as well. Now it doesn't look like it's doing our transition. So on the pop-up, we forgot to do the transition, or I deleted it or something. So we're transitioning on all properties over the course of 300 milliseconds. So if we start here, we should now see that this kind of comes down, and now we need to be able to actually get rid of the pop-up when it pops up. So we can now create our handle pop-up click. So handle pop-up click. And this is going to be a function where basically we just toggle those two classes. So we add a class of removed, and then we remove a class of open. Simple enough. So we click, open, play the video, pause it, get out of it, click another one, play, pause it, close it, etc. One thing to look into is accessibility with those pop-ups. That's not something that's my area of expertise, so definitely want to look into accessibility for pop-ups. But that's the demo. So a lot of cool features in here. We'll talk more about additional features that you can add at the very end of this video to make sure that you can take this to the next level, because it's not about what we just built here. It's about what you can build on your own to put this in your portfolio project. So we'll talk about additional features and things for you to keep in mind that you can add at the end of the video. But in the next step, we'll go ahead and work on hosting this on Hostinger. So back in your Hostinger dashboard, you'll need to set up a domain to get started. You actually get one for free, which is really cool. So you can choose a domain name and check the availability. And if it's available, you can enter in a little bit of information about yourself as a host and then get going from there. Then in the dashboard, you'll need to set up your actual hosting plan. So you can click on setup, and then we'll choose start from scratch, and then go to your control panel when it's set up. After you get there, scroll down to the file manager. And what we're going to do is open that up. We will go into the specific folder for our website. So this will be in the public HTML directory. So you can double click that to open it. There'll be one file to start, which we'll delete in a second. But once you get inside of there, you'll want to upload the files from your code. So the HTML, the CSS, and the JavaScript file. So you just upload those three files, go ahead and add them. Then we can remove, after those are uploaded, we can go ahead and remove that extra PHP file. And then now we've got all the files there ready to go. So if you go back to your hosting plan, you can find your domain, open that, and you should see the YouTube app. If you paste in a video, you now should see that YouTube video player just as you expected. All right, so you should have a fully deployed potential portfolio project, but the thing we really want to talk about now is how to turn this into the ultimate portfolio project. So let's start with a few talking points. So as you go into interviews, I think one of the important things about a portfolio project is that you can talk about it intelligently and relevantly to skills that are going to be useful. So a couple of talking points that you could talk about here. You could talk about using CSS Grid from a CSS perspective. You could talk about image performance. So we just pulled in a default size of an image. We didn't do any optimizations around pulling a smaller image or anything like that. So you could talk about going into the network tab, looking at how big of a file it is that it's pulling in, and trying to do some optimizations around that. You could also talk about, like, if you were to build this in React, how would you manage state versus how we're doing this in vanilla JavaScript? And how would you manipulate the DOM with React versus vanilla JavaScript? Again, if you wanted a learning opportunity to go into React and be able to do some talking points of comparison. Now, here's the really important part here. A lot of people do these tutorial projects and they don't know what to do next. So for this specific project and for almost anyone, here's some ideas to take this to the next level and to present yourself this learning opportunity. One is to add authentication. Adding authentication now is a pretty relatively big task. You could use something like Auth0, which is really almost as easy as it gets for something like this. I used to work at Auth0, so I'm a big fan. But you could add authentication, and now users could log in and now have their own personalized list. So to be able to do that, a next step now is also to store this data inside of some sort of database. So you could store it in MongoDB or Postgres database, or you could use a headless CMS like Sanity or Prismic or Storyblock or a bunch of different other ones. Now you're starting to have authentication and a backend or a database. So you have real world data that you're actually working with, and you can associate records with individual users. Another thing you could do if you want to be more focused on the front end is you could do some really fancy animations on how you show the pop-ups, how you hide the pop-ups, how you like really nice animations on hovers and things like that. If you want to be more of a front end person, you could pay attention to some of those details. Other really useful pieces here, adding tags to the videos, adding more inputs to the form. So you could add the title of the video, you could add certain tags, and then you can search and filter through the videos by the tag. This is getting more and more useful to supercharge this application. And lastly, you could potentially work with the actual YouTube API. So let's say somebody enters in a video ID and you want to grab the information about that video, like the title. Well, you could use the YouTube API to do that. Again, taking a pretty significant step beyond what is just a very basic portfolio project to now supercharging that portfolio project and giving yourself a lot of learning experiences and struggles, to be quite honest, to talk about in your interviews. When I went through my interviews with Microsoft, one of the top tech companies in the world, I talked about this app that I built, which was a Harry Potter trivia app. I had done enough where I had plenty to talk about with struggles, things I learned, how I moved past those things, and to talk intelligently about the technologies. So for this specific portfolio project, there's a bunch of different ideas on how to take that to the next level, and it's your responsibility to actually do that. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any feedback or requests for videos in the future, let me know in the comments below. Go and work on that portfolio project. Go and get it hosted. Go and build something that you can talk about intelligently in your interviews so that you can go get your first or your next job as a JavaScript developer.